So you read about Watergate in your book. Now let's look at its effects. First, Gerald Ford takes over as president. And remember, he was never elected. Not elected president, but not elected vice president either. Nixon's original vice president, Spiro Agnew, had resigned after a scandal involving him. So we have somebody who's president who never was elected by the whole nation. Ford has an opportunity to repair people's confidence in government after Watergate. However, that's quickly destroyed when he pardons Nixon. He did it for good reasons. He was trying to end the bitterness associated with Watergate and put the event in the past. He doesn't want America to have to go through months of a trial with a former president standing on trial there and possibly facing jail time. So Ford pardons him. However, this makes it look like to critics that Nixon and Ford had made a deal. Hey, I've got this thing coming up. It might be a problem for me. I'll make you vice president if and when I get in trouble, you make sure you pardon me. This is further corroborated by the fact that Nixon's aides were not pardoned. The people who actually were ordered to and went in and carried out the raid on the Watergate Hotel, they went to jail. And Ford really erodes the confidence that the American people have in government, and he's linked to the conspiracy early on. So in the aftermath, in the wake of Watergate and Vietnam, the public is very wary of government, and as a result, they're willing to listen to criticism of things like the covert actions by the CIA. There are reports coming out in the newspapers about illegal domestic spying by the CIA, spying on Americans. There are reports about illegal tests on mind-altering drugs, using things like LSD for interrogation. And the worst accusations are the accusations of assassination attempts by the CIA, especially against Fidel Castro. And President Ford confirms that these are not just rumor, these are facts. The CIA has tried to assassinate world leaders. This leads to an executive order outlawing assassination. The CIA nor the United States of America will no longer try to use assassination as a foreign policy tactic. President Ford also appoints George Bush Sr. as director of the CIA to really reform that organization. And he does a good job with that. And this is where he really makes a national name for himself, puts himself in position to be vice president under Reagan and eventually president on his own. The CIA also becomes much less secret. It's going to take a greater role in policy making. It's not so much about spying anymore as it is about advising the president on foreign policy. And Congress is going to respond by creating a permanent House and a permanent Senate committee to oversee the CIA, to make sure these things that are so embarrassing do not take place again. While in office, Ford issues a lot of vetoes. He is much more conservative than Richard Nixon and disagrees with Congress on a lot of issues. And as a result, he's not very popular. The Democratic challenger in 1976 is Jimmy Carter from Georgia. And he wins the Democratic nomination and he wins the presidency mainly by campaigning as a Washington outsider. Americans see Washington as a corrupt place by this point. Carter points out how he has never worked in Washington. He's honest, and he really paints himself as a populist, as a friend and somebody who will work for the common man. However, as president, he struggles because he lacks a clear political philosophy. He doesn't have a strong sense of direction while in office. He proposes some consumer and environmental protection laws, but that really angers big business. He tries to balance the budget, but he has to accept deficits. And welfare programs like Social Security need reform, but Carter and no one else in Washington is willing to alter Social Security. Jimmy Carter, like a lot of Democratic presidents, tries but gives up on national health insurance for all Americans. In the summer of 1979, when the United States in the midst of an oil crisis and economic downturn, President Carter goes on the air and delivers what's known as his crisis of confidence speech. and it will later be called the malaise speech by the press. Here's a sample.
So I want to speak to you first tonight about a subject even more serious than energy or inflation. I want to talk to you right now about a fundamental threat to American democracy. I do not mean our political and civil liberties. They will endure. And I do not refer to the outward strength of America, a nation that is at peace tonight everywhere in the world, with unmatched economic power and military might. The threat is nearly invisible in ordinary ways. It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will. We can see this crisis in the growing doubt about the meaning of our own lives and in the loss of a unity of purpose for our nation. Our progress has been part of a living history of America, even the world. We always believed that we were part of a great movement of humanity itself called democracy, involved in the search for freedom. And that belief has always strengthened us in our purpose. But just as we're losing our confidence in the future, we're also beginning to close the door on our past. In a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities, and our faith in God, too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. We've learned that piling up material goods cannot fill the emptiness of lives which have no confidence or purpose. The symptoms of this crisis of the American spirit are all around us.
So here's what malaise means. And although the speech was initially well received, eventually there's a bit of a negative backlash to it. People feel like Carter is blaming them. People feel like the president is blaming the American people without bringing up suggestions or ideas or plans to get the nation out of the oil and economic crisis that it was in. So the malaise speech is a real strike against Carter.